So hey guys, if you've been watching the news lately, you've probably seen that Texas has been having a lot of severe winter weather in the last week, and it unfortunately exposed a weakness in the Texas power grid. Now, for about 3 days, from Monday morning to Wednesday night, we had no electricity, which in turn meant no heat, and all of the assorted issues that go with that. Now, it was definitely not something we had really anticipated happening because we've had cold weather before, except this was a little bit different in that it actually took out the power, which surprised me because normally I don't think of just cold in itself being a problem, but of course, I've lived in New York for a long period of my life, and of course, I've lived in Texas for, I guess, pretty much almost half of it at this point. But having been in New York, it's like I know that sometimes snow and ice accumulate on the wires, and it can cause problems. Except this time, it wasn't the lines that were the problem, and I'll get into that in a little bit. But suffice it to say that for 3 days we kind of had to make do with our main source of heat coming from extra layers of clothing, from blankets, from hot tea, because we did have running water for the first 2 days, and warm meals, because we were fortunate enough to have access to gas and running water for the first 2 days. So we were able to cook our meals as long as we could do it on the stove or the oven, and we had running water, which was also good because it meant I could make hot tea as often as I wanted, which was pretty frequent. And we had some emergency preparations. So um, we had propane lights, we had emergency flashlights, we had a lot of battery-powered equipment as well as extra power cells for this sort of thing. We had an emergency generator, which we cracked out on the second day because we were getting tired of having absolutely no light at night. We had candles, we had some things that we could prepare without too much craziness because at least the first day or so we didn't really worry too much about doing dishes. Now, unfortunately, on the third day we lost fresh water because the water plants did not have the energy to pump the water out of the ground because Texas has a lot of underground water sources. So the third day, we had to rely on bottled water. Now, fortunately for us, that was as long as it lasted, and that was as severe as it got, in part because we were fortunate enough to have water and gas for most of that period, and we had done some things to prepare for it. Now, it was not fun for, 2 days. It was pretty much just getting warmth anywhere you could find it, which was a new experience for me, especially inside the house. And, we had as much we were doing pretty well compared to most people, I think, because we had supplies, we had gas, we had water, we had a few things that we had prepared, just not necessarily for this disaster specifically, but for disasters in general. We didn't even have to break into the emergency kit, which had non-perishable food that we keep for hurricanes and the like. And basically for 3 days, I kind of occupied myself with the limited things I had to do because I had my MP3 player, I had my tablet, which I spent reading Ark and Tales book a lot, and I had comic books that I had to go through because the comic book project that I mentioned previously had gotten to the point where I had a stack that I wanted to read, so this provided as good of excuse as any because even though I had my laptop, I wouldn't I wasn't really able to do anything in terms of my creative efforts during that period. And for the most part, we just kept ourselves occupied as best as possible. We had a generator so that we could watch a little TV on the second and third evenings, and we had Shag had the foresight to fill the tub so that we were able to flush the toilet when we lost access to running water. And for most intents and purposes, I think we're back to normal now. Power came back on Wednesday night and stayed on Thursday and Friday, and I've kind of been working slowly at getting back into normality because we things got a little chaotic. We had extension cords running through the house and kind of had to, rewire a couple things, move some lamps and such. But everything, at least at this point, is more or less back down to life as usual. Now, here's a little bit of information for people that aren't familiar with it, which I'm sure is probably a lot of you. Why it happened. Now, here's exactly what happened, and well, let me back up a little bit and go talk to you about a little bit about what happened in New York. I guess when I was in college, and at the time, I didn't realize this, but there was the three power there was the Niagara Falls plant went down for some reason, and I don't exactly recall why, but when the Niagara Falls plant went down, it kicked the load down to the next level, which couldn't handle the power requirements, which shut off and in turn caused a domino effect, exposing a weakness in the northeastern power grid. So for at least a full evening, and I don't remember how long it lasted, the power grid for the entire northeastern part of the country was down, and that meant no traffic lights, no electricity, no nothing. And this was something that seemed like it should have been a lesson, but I guess in some respects, a lot of people have to learn lessons the hard way. But this exposed a weakness in the northeastern power grid because if you took out the Niagara plant, then it would cause a cascade reaction. Now, I don't know if it's still that way now, but I know that it was then. And it was interesting trying to get home from my job at that time without any traffic lights, but I managed to get home okay. And I think I just remember spending the evening, with a lot of candles. Now, what happened this time, and again, for those of you guys that don't know, there are three power grids in the United States: the West Coast, the East Coast, and Texas. Now, Texas wanted to avoid federal regulation or something like that, so they have their own power grid, which is largely built by private companies. Now, the reason this, I guess, is just in case. I don't know. Texas has always been a very independent place, and as such, they have their own power grid. Now, this probably might seem like a good idea in some regards, but here's the problem. The lines were not the issue. The lines were fine. The transmission for getting energy from point A to point B was not compromised. What happened was the power generation facilities themselves were not winterized. So these facilities need water to operate, and water, when the temperature dropped below freezing, the facilities were not able to operate and generate the power to go out onto the lines. So basically, this resulted in Texas being powerless for 3 days because they knew that this was a possibility, but it was gauged at the time that the likelihood of it happening was not worth the expense to winterize the facilities and prepare them for cold weather. Now, they tried to blame it a little bit on the wind turbines, which did freeze, but the wind turbines are only 10% of Texas's power generation capabilities. Now, a lot of it is natural gas and a lot of it is oil. So this is how the state with a huge amount of energy surplus actually had no power for 3 days. And this was particularly a difficulty because, with no power to generate, the other thing is that Texas having its own power grid meant that it was isolated from the other two. So, long story short, what this resulted in is the fact that Texas cannot lend nor borrow power from other grids. So, when we lost our power generation capabilities, we couldn't borrow power from local states in order to power our houses and businesses and so on and so forth. So, the result of this is that Texas's independence worked against it this time because they didn't, we're not connected to any other state. So this is kind of a plus and a minus. I mean, had the situation been reversed, maybe it would have been we might have been all right, but still, it just kind of points out a weakness in the Texas power grid because if the temperature gets cold enough, Texas can't generate power. Now, as far as what happens from here, I don't really know. I think that what should happen is that we should learn from this and take this foreseeable problem and make sure that it doesn't happen again because climate change, maybe, I mean, whether you believe in it or not, the fact is that temperatures every once in a while are going to get that cold. And that being said, it's important to, I think, prepare. Now, I understand that it's expensive to winterize, and this might be different. I might be saying something different if I was the one who's paying the bills, but it just seems like it's good business sense as well to account for this, especially now that it has happened. I mean, it's one thing if you know that it's coming and you still don't prepare, and you're lucky enough to survive without too much difficulty. I mean, Texas certainly took a hit, but this is one of those things where hopefully, at the very least, what can come out of this is that we learn from this and that they take steps to winterize so that it doesn't happen again. Now, that's all decisions that I guess is up to the government level. And what happens, I don't know, because sometimes things like this happen, and this is how, this is some of the only ways that change happens in certain regards. But, it's not federally regulated, so I'm not exactly sure what, if anything, can come up from above. I know that Biden has mentioned federal relief to Texas, and I know that quite a few people suffered from carbon monoxide poisoning and other things in attempts to heat their homes. But I mean, I hope that whatever comes out of this is that we at least make sure that the possibility of it happening again is less than it was this time, because it was not something I would care to repeat. But, as far as what happens next, we'll just have to wait and see. And I guess that is it for now. So hopefully soon we will be back to our regular scheduled programming. Catch you later.
Thanks for watching, and if you liked it, click the subscribe button and leave a comment below. You can also find me on Twitter and a few other places on the web, or support me via Patreon or Ko-fi. Zebra hugs!